Okay, so in this chapter, we're going to continue working on the drone racer model that we started in the previous chapter. And for this scene, I'm using the drone racer 01.ma scene. That's where I'm starting out anyways. And while I'm adding stuff to the model to get it closer to our reference imagery, I'm also going to introduce some more concepts to polygon modeling here in Wyatt. So let's turn off the display menu for a second. And I want to turn on the heads-up display. So I'll go into display, heads-up display, and I'm going to activate polygon count. So this right here shows us the polygons in the scene, the number of polygons in the scene. So we have 3 columns here and 5 rows. So we have vertices, edges, faces, triangles, and UVs. This column represents all of the verts, edge, faces, tris, and UVs in the scene. This column represents the verts, edges, faces, tris, and UVs that are the selected object. And then if I select some components like these vertices right here, this shows you how many vertices I have selected, or faces, edges, and so on. So that's the heads-up display. So to switch from various components, you can use the right-click marking menus. If I just right-click over the surface, I can choose edge, or vertex, or face, or multi-select, which means it's just going to select the component closest to my cursor. I also tend to right-click and choose select to switch back into object mode as opposed to pressing F8, kind of the same thing. So, and then you could also select UVs. So let's say you want to convert a selection. I'll select a face. I'm going to hold the Shift key and select another face. Hold the Control key, right-click, and then I can say to vertices or to vertex perimeter. So it's just the vertices and the perimeter. To edges. If I select a face here and I want to grow selection, or I can grow selection along loop. So there's lots of little options for changing your selection here in this control right-click menu. A couple other tricks if I want to select an entire edge loop. So an edge loop is the edge that goes all the way around the surface here. I can double-click on that. If I want to select multiple edge loops, I can hold the Shift key, double-click. Likewise, if I'm in face selection mode and I double-click on a face, it selects all the faces of the surface. If I'm in vertex selection mode and double-click on a vertex, it selects all the vertices of the surface. So you'll see me use a number of those selection methods as well as some others. So the marking menus has a lot of options here for quickly changing your selection type. So if we're looking at the body of our drone racer, it's obviously very low polygon and very blocky. If we want to smooth it out, there's several ways to go about doing this. The most straightforward way is to select the surface and go into Mesh and choose Smooth, and that subdivides the model. Each face gets divided into 4 smaller faces, and the surface becomes smooth. We have a little pop-up menu. Again, middle mouse button drag and the number of divisions and change how many times it's subdivided. You can do the same thing by going into the outliner under Inputs for Poly Smooth Face node. Select divisions and middle mouse button drag. Does the same thing. So this is kind of like a permanent way to smooth the surface, right? Because we're literally adding more polygons. We're subdividing. But there's kind of a less permanent approach. So I'm going to press Control Z a few times to get back to here. And instead of going Mesh Smooth, I'm going to use what's known as a Smooth Mesh Preview. So with the object selected, I'm going to press the 3 key on my keyboard. And what we see is it's been smoothed, but as a wireframe indicates, it hasn't actually been subdivided. Our poly count goes up in the heads-up display, but if I press the 1 key, it goes back to this version. So just as the name indicates, this is a preview. 3 is Smooth Mesh Preview. 1 is just straight-up polygons. 2 shows you the Smooth Mesh Preview with the polygon cage around it. And this is nice because I can right-click and say choose a vertex. Press W for the move tool and then start moving this around to shape the surface. If I press 3, it's just going to make the cage invisible. I can still select a vertex and then move it around and shape it. So 2 and 3 keys toggle between the cage being visible and being invisible. If I hit 1, I'm just back to this. So the nice thing about the Smooth Mesh Preview is you can use your modeling tools to kind of shape the surface. And then when you have the surface the way you like it, you can choose to smooth it at that point using this method. but it's kind of a less permanent solution, and it's great when you're kind of working out issues while modeling. So I'm going to press the 3 key and switch back to Smooth Mesh Preview, and now I can use this to shape my surface a little bit. Let's go to the side view, and I'm going to turn on Shading X-Ray. It's not that far off, but as you can see, there are parts in the surface that I want to add straighter edges. So I want some parts to be nice and round and some parts to be a little bit straighter. So there's a few ways we can go about doing that. Let's switch back to perspective view. Let's go to the top view and just shape this out a little bit more. There we go. So one way is to insert edge loops. So an edge loop is this edge that loops all the way around the surface. So this is an edge loop. This is an edge loop as well. I can select an entire edge loop by double-clicking on an edge, and you see it will select a continuous edge loop right there. So I could double-click on an edge loop and literally move it backwards or forwards, and you can see as it gets closer to the end here, this starts to get a little bit tighter. So to insert an edge loop, you can go up here to Mesh Tools and do Insert Edge Loop Tool. And this activates the wireframe cage around your smooth mesh surface. Let's turn off X-ray for a second here. So if I click right here, you can see I have the green dashed line, and as I drag back and forth, that allows me to determine where I want to put this edge loop. So I put it down here, you can see that I still have a rounded surface, but it's a little bit more tighter here. But you are adding geometry to the surface when you're doing this, so you want to kind of go slow. Don't just add edge loops all over the place, because that's going to give you more geometry to worry about while you're shaping. So I just like to kind of consider where I want to add the geometry. And Insert Edge Loop tool is still active, as you can see, it's highlighted right here. It does work with symmetry, so if I click right here, it's going to add it symmetrically. So there you go. So that's one way to tighten up the curves a little bit and add some geometry to the surface. Another way to tighten up an edge while you're in Smooth Mesh Preview is to add a crease. So I'm going to right click over this and choose Edge. I'm going to double click right here. These are corners, so this is not a full, true edge loop. Like this is an edge loop. But these are corners, so it's not a complete edge loop. So in order to select all these edges, I'll double click on this one, hold the Shift key, double click here, hold the Shift key, double click there. Now I have them all selected, and I'll choose Mesh Tools, Crease Tool. And now I'll middle mouse button drag, and you can see that kind of creates a straighter edge because it's a crease. And I can press W for the Move tool and move this back, or even pull it inside like that. But you have a nice crease there. And it's a great way to create a panel. If I select this, I'm going to press 1 to go back to regular polygon mode. But you can see the crease is still visible because we have the bolded edges there. So it's indicated by the bolded edges. And if I decide to smooth this using the conventional smooth, we can see the crease is still there. Now I'm going to press Control Z and then 3 to go back here. If I wanted to remove the crease, I can select those edges, select the crease tool, and then just middle mouse button drag back and forth to edit the crease. So you can see it's part of the construction history. It's right here under Polycrease under Inputs. So it's still part of the construction history until I delete history on it. So while you're working on polygon modeling, if you're in the modeling menu set, the main menus you'll be working with are Mesh, Edit Mesh, Mesh Tools, and Mesh Display. So Mesh has a bunch of actions that apply to the entire mesh. Then we have Edit Mesh, a bunch of stuff you can do to the components. So these are divided into components, vertices, edges, faces, and curves. And then we have Mesh Tools, such as the Crease tool or Insert Edge Loop tool, and then options for Mesh Display. If you get tired of moving up to those menus, you can also hold the Shift key and the right mouse button, and then you can see we have a lot of the same tools in this marking menu. That's great if you want to work without the menus. If you hit Control and tap the space bar and you want to just hold Shift key and the right mouse button for this marking menu, right mouse button for selection, and then to convert selection, hold the Control key and the right mouse button. Let's talk about working with extrusion. So I'd like to create kind of a, if you look at the diagram here, I kind of have a straight edge in the side view in the front. So I like to create some kind of vent or something that looks interesting. So I'm going to select this face, hold the Shift key and select this face. We can go into Edit Mesh and choose Extrude. We can also press Control E. And you can see I get this little manipulator plus this little pop-up menu. So I can drag on the arrow or drag on this little cube here to interactively change the way the extrusion looks. Or I can also middle mouse button drag on these settings, thickness, local translate Z, offset, divisions, and then if you want to extrude the individual faces without having them connected, that's what Keep Faces Together does. So I'm going to turn that off, and let's just do something like this. Push that in a little bit. You can use both. It doesn't really matter if you want to use one or the other. So that looks pretty cool. But let's say I want to actually have an open vent. So I could just get rid of these faces by simply hitting backspace key. And then I'm going to right click and choose Edge here. And press Control E again. And this time I'm going to extrude edges instead of faces. So same kind of similar options. I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to press R for the scale tool. Maybe scale this up, and W for move, and move this down. No, scaled too much. There we go. Another way we can use the extrude tool is to add this antenna right here. Now, if I wanted to add it as a separate object, I could totally do that. But for the purposes of demonstration, I think I'm going to actually extrude it. So let's go to the side view. Press 4 for wireframe. So we want to have it. Right click and choose vertices. Maybe press W, move this down a little bit. Match our diagram a bit better. There we go. And then what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on this edge. Right click, choose edge, double click on the edge and move it back here. Maybe R for scale, scale it down a little bit. And then I'm going to select this. I'm going to hold the Shift key, insert edge loop tool, and then click on my surface and then add an edge loop right there. I'm going to press Q for selection, double click on this and maybe move it back a little bit. So just kind of fine tuning where this is. This stuff can be changed pretty easily later. But there I have. Press 5 to switch back to shaded view. So I'm going to right click, choose face, select both of these faces. Control E to activate the extrude tool, and then Control E to extrude again. And then I'm going to press R for scale, W for move, switch to right view, and then move this over like this. And then let's press 4 for wireframe. I'm going to hold the Shift key, the right mouse button, and choose Insert Edge Loop tool. Click right here to add an edge loop just to tighten this up a little bit. Maybe add a couple more. And right click and choose vertices. W for move. Select these vertices and just kind of move them into place here to create this kind of antenna coming out the back. So one thing that you have to remember if you're using the marking menus is they are based on context. So if I'm in object selection mode and I hold the Shift key and the right mouse button, I get a different menu than if I'm in component selection mode like I am now and hold the Shift key and the right mouse button, and that can trip you out a little bit. So if you're using the marking menu and you can't find the tool you're looking for, try switching to object or component selection mode. Switch to perspective view, press 5 for shaded. Let's go to the front view. And select these vertices and just move them in. Make this a bit thinner. I'll choose Mesh Tools, Slide Edge, and then middle mouse button drag to slide it down. Maybe R for scale, scale it in. And then switch to vertices. And Move tool, let's do something like that. And that's the result right there. I'll hold the Shift key, right mouse button, and choose Insert Edge Loop, and maybe add one more edge loop right there to tighten it up. Something like that. So as I mentioned before, some of these marking menus are context dependent. So if I'm in object selection mode and I hold the Shift key and the right mouse button, you can see I get these options right here. But if I press F8 to switch into component mode and hold the Shift key and the right mouse button, I get different options. And if I select a different component, I get different options. So that might be a little bit confusing when you're starting out, in which case you might want to continue to use these menus until you feel more comfortable finding the tools that you need. And then, of course, on top of this, we also have the modeling toolkit, which is a nice, convenient way to get many of these same functions. We'll go into this in more detail in the next video. But, the point is right now is I want to show you how to get to all these different tools so you can actually get some modeling done. Okay, so the next video, we're going to work on these wings a little bit. And I'll be introducing the tools you can find in the modeling toolkit. Many of them are very similar or the very same tools that you find in these menus or in the marking menus. Again, Maya is super redundant. They like to have a lot of the same tools in many different places. The nice thing about it is that does allow you to kind of design your own workflow. The annoying thing about it is it takes a while to wrap your head around where to find all these different things. Next video, modeling toolkit. And I'm going to save the scene as Drone Racer 02.NA.